Okay, so look like we are live. Just give us a couple of seconds and then we'll get things started. Sergeant, will you check to make sure that we are in the right Zoom room?
We are just in gallery mode. If we can switch that.
Thank you.
And if we could rename our chair.
Yeah.
Yes. Chair Ariola, please.
Oh.
Done.
Awesome. So let's get started. Sergeant, will you begin your recordings, please? Thank you.
Recording to PC on the way.
Thank you. Recording the cloud is also underway. Good morning and welcome to today's New York City Council remote hearing on the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management. At this time, will all panelists please turn on your videos? I repeat, all panelists, please turn on your videos. Thank you. To minimize disruption, please place all electronic devices to vibrate or silent mode. Thank you. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. I repeat, testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your kind cooperation. Chair Ariola, we are ready to begin.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Councilmember Joanne Ariola, and I am the chair of the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management. I am joined today by committee members Riley, Yeager, Feliz, and Holden. Today, this committee will consider Introduction 29 of 2022, sponsored by Councilmember Keith Powers. A thriving hospitality industry, restaurants, bars, cafes, is central to our city's economic prosperity. During the COVID pandemic, facing the reality of indoor dining restrictions and other health precautions, restaurants experienced severe loss of revenue. To survive, the city adapted. Many hospitality establishments shifted operations outdoors, providing patrons with a semblance of normalcy in uncertain times. An open restaurants program enacted by this council in 2020 expanded the opportunities for restaurants to serve patrons on the streets using sidewalks and closed streets, a program that became a lifeblood to many who struggled with restaurants. Facing the prospect of colder weather during the winter months, the prior administration authorized the limited use of gas-fueled propane heaters to enable restaurants to continue to serve patrons outdoors. However, citing fire safety concerns last fall, temporary authorization was lifted, and propane heaters again became illegal, forcing restaurants to invest in more expensive alternatives or suspend outdoor operations on colder days. That brings us to today's hearing. Introduction 29 would amend the New York City Fire Code to authorize the outdoor use of portable gas-fueled heating devices. Currently, the Fire Code limits such portable devices to those fueled by piped natural gas. This bill would expand the scope of authorized equipment to include portable heating devices fueled by liquefied petroleum gas, also known as propane. Additionally, the bill would require safety precautions related to the operation and handling of such devices. I understand that safety concerns exist regarding the proper storage and transportation of propane canisters. These concerns could be addressed and potentially mitigated through proper regulations. Since the city benefited from thriving outdoor dining options, the propane heaters were an essential piece of that success. And I'm interested in discussing whether there is a safe way to keep this option ongoing for the city's restaurants. The committee looks forward to hearing from the fire department on this legislation and hopes to work collaboratively to find an appropriate balance to allow safe operations of propane heaters to resume. I will now invite Councilmember Powers to speak on this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Ariola, and thank you for giving me the opportunity today to say a few words about my bill, and of course for holding this hearing today. And it's nice to see everyone. And thank you to the members of the committee as well. Earlier this year, I introduced a bill, Intro 29, which would amend the New York City Fire Code to authorize the outdoor use of portable gas-fueled heating devices, aka propane heaters. This was at a moment when we were talking still a lot, and we are, about the permanency and the necessity of outdoor dining, which was a godsend to restaurants in our city during the pandemic. All stakeholders in our city worked hard and quick to get the temporary outdoor dining program up and running, and it's been extremely successful. And I have to give every agency a lot of credit for their work to get this program up and running and to help save our restaurants. And propane heaters became a big part of that as it got cold out in the city, to give people an opportunity to continue to do outdoor dining, to continue to socialize and see each other and continue to find ways to support our restaurants. While this was previously prohibited under the fire code, then Mayor de Blasio allowed their usage by emergency order in October 2020, which coincided with the creation of the temporary outdoor dining program. Then in October 2021, with little warning to restaurants as it was starting to get cold out again, the mayor announced he would no longer allow propane heaters. Instead, he asked restaurants to convert to natural gas or electric heating options and created a grant program to reimburse businesses with less than $1 million to reimburse them for buying the new types of heaters. At the time, then Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams and myself wrote a letter asking the mayor to reconsider the ban and permit the continued usage of propane heaters under the safety guidelines. And I also sponsored this legislation at the final months of last term. Now, as we're talking here in the city council in the city about the future of the outdoor dining program and creating a program that's safe and workable for everyone, it is a good time to re-examine the reasons in favor and against the ban on propane heaters. And it's my understanding that there were no fires or injuries during their year of usage. So I'm eager to hear more from the fire department about their experience with it during the year that we had it in place. I'm also eager to hear more information about who received those grants and the effectiveness of the heating alternatives. But I've heard from many restaurants who believe propane heaters were a lifeline to them during the pandemic. They already had them. They didn't need to go out and buy new ones. And they believe that we have to be doing everything we can right now to be supporting, like I do, our local restaurants and businesses that providing them with the resources they can to survive. So that's the goal of the bill. We introduced it last year, and of course now here as well. I want to thank Chair Ariola for putting this hearing together and hearing this bill today. Of course, looking forward to hearing from the administration, and want to thank my colleagues who have signed on to this bill so far, including Councilmember Velasquez, who joined me at the introduction of this bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Powers. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Council Josh Kingsley, to go over some procedural items.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Josh Kingsley, Counsel to the Fire and Emergency Management Committee. Before we begin, I will remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify, after which you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify. Please listen to your name to be called, and I will periodically be announcing who the next panelist will be. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask a question, please use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you in order. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. The first panelist to give testimony today will be representatives from the New York City Fire Department. For FDNY, testimony will be provided by John Hodgins, who's the acting chief of department for FDNY, Joseph Jardin, who is the chief of fire prevention for the FDNY, and Kelly Carr, who's the deputy code development counsel at FDNY. I will call on you when it's your turn to speak. Before we begin, I will administer the oath for the members of the administration. I will call on each of you individually for a response, so please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these committees, and to respond honestly to council member questions? We'll start with Chief of Department Hodgins.
I do.
Chief Jardin.
I do.
And now Ms. Carr.
I do.
You may begin. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chief Ariola and all council members present. My name is John Hodgins, and I am the Acting Chief of Department at the New York City Fire Department. I am joined today by Joseph Jordan, Chief of the Bureau of Fire Prevention, and by Kelly Carr, Deputy Fire Code Development Counsel. Thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on the proposed legislation, Introduction 29. When I appeared in front of this committee last month, one of the statistics that we reported was that in 2021, New York City had fewer than 100 fire deaths. We pointed out that this was the 16th consecutive year in which fire deaths remained under that threshold. This is significant, given that it was not long ago that New York City experienced hundreds of fire deaths a year. One of the key factors in the city's success over their last 2 decades has been a strong New York City fire code. We urge the council to be especially deliberative when considering measures that would weaken the code, particularly in the area of hazardous materials such as propane. As the council members are aware, during the early stages of COVID-19 pandemic, then Mayor de Blasio issued an executive order temporarily prohibiting restaurants from admitting patrons inside their establishment. He also issued an executive order temporarily suspending certain requirements in order to help the restaurant industry utilize outdoor dining structures instead. When the fire department was asked to consider suspending the prohibition on using propane as comfort heating, we had several significant concerns. Propane is combustible at a wide range of concentrations. Liquid propane is colorless and odorless, and it becomes up to 270 times more expansive when it is converted to gas. It can be used safely with proper precautions. We can all picture a standard 20-pound propane tank used with a grill outside in a yard or a park, for instance, and this sort of use can be fairly low risk. However, widespread use of propane in a dense urban environment transforms the level of risk into a far more hazardous scenario. Propane gas is heavier than air, which means that it can accumulate in confined spaces. If a propane canister has a leak, the gas can collect in enclosures, subways, cellars, and basements. In 2009, the contents of a single 20-pound propane container ignited and destroyed a building in Flushing, causing the front wall of a 2-story brick row house to crumble, blowing out the back wall and projecting debris across the yard, driveway, and street, and damaging a neighboring house. Restaurants using propane for comfort heating creates a situation in which multiple propane tanks are being used with open flames in a relatively small area, often with diners sitting in close proximity and waitstaff and patrons moving around nearby. The use of comfort heating in a typical outdoor dining setting produces a variety of serious challenges. Beyond the dangers of propane use, the department is also very concerned about the transport and storage of propane. The volume of propane necessary to support the New York City restaurant industry requires the delivery and storage of thousands of propane tanks on a daily basis. We don't need to rely on conjecture about how it would work if this legislation were to become law, because we saw how it played out in 2020, and the results were troubling. The period 2 winters ago when the restriction was lifted led to a significant number of hazards across the city. We saw widespread non-compliance with the basic rules for operating propane-fueled heaters. Many restaurants attempted to circumvent safe storage requirements. Firefighters and fire prevention inspectors routinely encountered unlawful storage of propane associated with outdoor dining areas. In some of the most egregious incidents, canisters of propane were found on roadways, below fire escapes, concealed by planters, and even inside the barriers designed to provide vehicle impact protection. The fire department at that time issued 70 summonses and 1,300 violation orders during this period for a variety of issues, including flagrant violations of unsafe storage of propane and failure to maintain safe distance requirements. We have some photos to help illustrate a few of the hazardous conditions that we encountered that I will show at the conclusion of this testimony. As dangerous as many of the storage situations at restaurants were, even greater hazards occurred among the industries necessary to supply the increased demand for propane. The most serious incident occurred in December 2020 when a truck making propane deliveries flipped on its side and burst into flames in the westbound lane of the Long Island Expressway in Queens, directly in front of Lefrak City. The truck was carrying approximately 300 20-pound propane cylinders. It exploded into a large fireball, which was followed by a series of numerous explosions. This was a very dangerous situation. There was a large volume of fire with a plume of flames at times reaching the heights of nearby 18-story buildings. Though the explosions and ensuing fire occurred on an expressway, the heat was so great that firefighters on scene became concerned that a shift in the wind might cause windows in nearby dwellings to fail and lead to apartment fires. Propane canisters continued to explode, with many becoming projectiles flying through the air for 100 feet or more, striking nearby buildings and vehicles. The name that we use for this type of explosion is a BLEVE, which is a firefighting term that describes boiling, liquid, expanding vapor explosions. This incident led to upwards of 100 BLEVEs. With propane containers exploding in every direction, it was a minor miracle that none of them struck any first responders or civilians on the expressway or the surrounding areas. We are very lucky that tragedy was avoided. The string of multiple explosions and propane containers becoming missiles initially made it impossible to respond as we normally would to fight a vehicle fire. One fire officer later described feeling unsettled as he could see, hear, and feel the explosions 300 feet away. Initially unsure how to approach, firefighters ended up crawling, being blocked by a Jersey barrier of the expressway to shield themselves from the explosions. They crept to within about 150 feet of the truck, where they used hose lines to begin fighting the fire. A battalion chief on scene described the situation as extremely dangerous, noting that the members really put themselves at risk, particularly given the number of BLEVE explosions. The Bureau of Operations found the incident so concerning that we created a training video to show other firefighters what they would be dealing with if a situation like it occurred again. I know words may not do it justice, so we brought a video of this event just to give you a good idea of what we're talking about. We'll play the video at the conclusion of this testimony. You can see why the fire department has been so reluctant to change the rules again to invite businesses to move thousands of additional propane containers in and out of the city every night. We know from experience that many would be stored and concealed in unsafe ways. At the height of a pandemic, the city took a lot of unusual measures with no intention or expectation that they would become a permanent part of life. This brief experiment, used to help prop up restaurants when they were unable to seat patrons indoors, gave us a winter with numerous problems. We are extremely fortunate that nobody was killed. Since that time, we have successfully completed a winter season in which restaurants were not permitted to use propane for comfort heating. Through their own talent, resilience, and creativity, the restaurant industry has learned to provide comfort heating without the use of dangerous combustibles like propane. In my view, as acting chief of department, this legislation, while well-intentioned, seriously underestimates the significant and potentially deadly hazard to firefighters and the people of New York. At this time, I'll show some of the photos and the video that I mentioned, and then we will I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Chief. We'll share the screen with the proper kind of stuff. Please be sure to describe the pictures as we go along to comply with applicable accessibility requirements. Thank you so much.
Okay. On the left of your screen, you'll see propane tanks stored. This is inside the boxed out areas that the restaurant owners built to where they could seat patrons inside on the street. This is, just one car that lost control that would maybe slam into these propane canisters could create an explosion that could potentially take down the building that's in front of the outdoor dining structure, and also injure as many people are within a 200 to 300 foot radius of that explosion. In the center, that's the roadway that the tanks are stored in. That's the structure that the tanks are stored in when it went without the cover off, and that's what basically what this slide depicts is storing them on the street where they could be hit by a truck or a car very easily that lost control. This next slide shows storage of propane tanks very haphazardly within structures. Now, storage of propane indoors is prohibited. And here we have, many tanks stacked right on top of each other. It looks like they're stuffed into a bathroom. We have them in storage areas underneath stairways, and also in these, it looks like the basement of potentially a multiple dwelling. We have a lineup of maybe 10 propane cylinders within a multiple dwelling. Now, if a fire were to occur in any of these scenarios inside this building, there would be a devastating explosion that would level the building and injure or kill anybody that's in any proximity to that. And we never know when we're going to have a fire. And these are the situations that we saw on a daily basis when we were out, canvassing restaurants. And by the way, when we went to the restaurants, we went with an education mindset to try to help them to do this safely. And these are just some of the things that we found. Go to the next one. We also had the heaters, which were a hazard, which were placed, the guidelines, there was specific guidelines that they could not be placed with any type of covering. And everybody, a large amount of restaurant owners improvised and not being aware of all of the safety hazards, or not willing to comply with them, or just, I understand it was a difficult time, but you see there's many situations that created a very dangerous situation where the heaters are placed right up against the wall underneath a roofed structure. We have a cylinder that is hidden within a shrubbery, and we have a propane heater within it looks like a tent enclosure, which is a dangerous situation because it should never be in a setting that is covered, let alone inside a structure. We came across more than one time. Now, because of the amount of restaurants in New York City and what it would take to transport these cylinders, if they were complying, which we saw earlier, many of them were improvising and not complying and creating a very dangerous situation. But to do this, correctly, they would have to transport the cylinders in and out of the city every day and every morning and every night when the restaurant opens and when the restaurant closes. A restaurant uses a multitude of cylinders per day to heat the numerous heaters that they are using at their outdoor structure. You see what we started to come across with these large-scale ad hoc storage facilities that were housing up to 900, 1,000 cylinders in large distribution center, and it was for the outdoor dining industry. it was somebody thought that this would be a solution to have the cylinders, close by in areas where there were many restaurants. But in fact, if we were to have a fire, which I said, we never know where we're going to have a fire. It happens any day, any time, holiday, middle of the night, morning. If this building were to go on fire, it would be a devastating war zone of explosions and destruction. This is another facility we came across that was just storing propane tanks this was a warehouse in Willets Point, Queens, and we found over 1,000 illegally stored propane tanks at this warehouse. And these are enclosed structures. Sometimes they could be near on a residential block, or just any opportunity could come if somebody could make money and storing these cylinders. We just have a large potential for illegal and extremely dangerous storage of these cylinders due to the volume necessary in a city like New York if all restaurants required using these cylinders. This is the video I described in the testimony of the accident that occurred on the Long Island Expressway. We'll play the video. The truck flipped on its side after sliding on ice. And as you can see, there's a large fireball. And this is a relatively open area. There are no buildings or structures surrounding the Expressway. As you just saw, that explosion, that propane cylinder flew a couple of 100 feet, and there were buildings in close proximity to that. Some of the cylinders, there was multiple explosions like that, and one of them hit a building, or more than one of them hit buildings and vehicles in the area. Now this, like I said, there's another explosion. This is a pretty wide open area. If this were to happen in Little Italy of Manhattan, this would be a catastrophe beyond anything we've seen. There is another video of the what we were dealing with on the Long Island Expressway, and just the fact of the amount of cylinders needed in the city to implement this program. We would have these vehicles on the road, throughout the day, and going into neighborhoods that are densely populated, and there is also, just all the buildings are in close proximity to each other. As you could see, these propane cylinders turned into like missiles, and they're projecting hundreds of feet in the air. And this is uncontained. If that happens in a building, it causes structural damage and collapse. So this is, this is an example of just the powerful explosions that propane, portable propane cylinders can create. So thank you. And at this time, I'm available, and Chief Jordan and Kelly Carr for any questions you may have or comments.
Well, thank you, Chief Hodgins, for your testimony. It certainly was compelling, and the visuals had great impact. So just a couple of questions on the PowerPoint that you showed. And in your testimony, you referred to the fire in 2009. And that does not apply to outdoor use, but was there any instance during outdoor use of propane heating tanks or propane gas tanks that had any leaks and or gas collecting in enclosed spaces during the time they were used during the pandemic?
Well, luckily we did not have any serious incidents with the use of propane, but it's just like anything else with fire safety. There really is no, timing of it, or it can happen at any time. And that's why we have the fire safety regulations, because we understand It really is an issue and a safety issue, not only for the public outside, but even the restaurant employees and the restaurant owners and the staff that works at the restaurant. Having these cylinders stored in areas and like as you saw on the roadway, in a situation where just one out of control car can create an explosion and a fireball, is just something that, you know, I'm not comfortable with. I know
But there
that
were no, but the answer to the question was there were none. So, and I just want to take a moment to note that council members Carr and Schulman have joined. Additionally, the videos that you showed certainly were eye-opening, but were those trailers or tractor trailers, were they transporting under the guidelines, necessary for the transportation of propane gas tanks?
yes. So any transportation of propane requires, adherence to safety, a lot of safety laws. The vendors are licensed and trained in the transport of propane. And yes, that was all of those protocols were being followed in that instance.
Okay, were the pictures that you shown, was that the general findings when you went to restaurants, or were these just like really bad actors? And was that the worst of what you found? What was the ratio of people doing the right thing in storage, in transportation, and in usage to what you've shown us on your PowerPoint?
These were some of the, more egregious instances, but there were multiple. As I stated, we gave out 70 criminal court summonses and 1,000 violation orders. In many cases, we had to call for our hazmat component of the fire department to come and confiscate these cylinders. We don't just leave them there. We clear the area of the cylinders. That was becoming an everyday occurrence, which it occurs rarely now, but it was an everyday occurrence for us to send out a hazmat team and truck to a restaurant to confiscate the cylinders. In fact, we had to put 2 more trucks into service that we don't normally use like we're not using today. But this was the demand for confiscation of cylinders grew exponentially during that period.
Mm-hmm. Would there be any circumstance where the fire department envisions creating a safe storage requirement that would be approved storage for facilities with safety provisions?
Well, the fire department is of course, willing to work with partners towards any type of legislation. But with this issue, the density of the city and the lack of available property and just the amount of restaurants in Manhattan and other areas of the city in a small geographical area, and the amount of cylinders would make it very difficult to, I believe, to store safely. As you saw some of those pictures of the warehouses, I mean, that was the solution that, some in the industry had come up with. And they may not be, well-versed in the extreme danger of this gas. So I'm not placing blame, but, it's just, I'm aware of it. And I know that, it is extremely dangerous and it can cause explosions and building collapses and death. If not stored outdoors in a safe environment, which I'm in downtown Brooklyn right now, I cannot imagine for miles that type of a scenario in this area.
So, Chief, what uses for propane are currently authorized under the New York City Fire Code?
So, New York City Fire Code allows private dwellings, R3 occupancies, to have a 20-pound propane cylinder for barbecue use. They are also allowed to have 1 additional spare cylinder per household. It is used for potentially for fire pits where you would have one cylinder similar to the barbecue. It is used in construction sites, and it for certain types of construction procedures, and also it is used in for food vending trucks. That is the legal application of propane.
So on-street food vendors and carts. Sidewalk food vendors or on-street food vendors and carts.
Yes.
And how do you distinguish currently what is authorized use from the use of propane-fueled heating devices then?
Well, the 4 instances I just gave you, those are the only authorized use. And distinguish between them is that when we started to talk about legalizing the use in food vending trucks, there were also many concerns with that, and we were able to work with that, given the fact that the volume is manageable, and also the volume of cylinders, and also that the food truck is not on the sidewalk or typically embedded into a densely populated residential area.
Well, I disagree with the fact that they're not on sidewalks. I've seen them plenty of times on sidewalks. So let's switch to storage. So what are the current storage requirements for propane canisters?
They have to be stored in a fire department approved facility. These facilities are outdoors, and they are in areas where they're not exposing, residential or any other type of occupancies.
And they require permitting from fire department?
Yes.
Okay, as does the naturally piped gas. Does that require a permit?
The naturally piped gas, yes, it does require it is, it's a process within the construction field where, a licensed architect would draw the plans, and it goes through the Department of Buildings is the primary approval agency, and the fire department also is involved in that process.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to now switch back to Josh as I see some of my colleagues have their hands up.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to now recognize Councilmember Powers, followed by Councilmember Holden.
Starting time.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Areola. I'm just going to go quick, so I'll do some yes or no questions just to kick it off. Did the FDNY and yourself support the initial plan to use propane in 2020?
We had serious reservations, but being that understanding we were in a unprecedented time in the city and with a global pandemic, and the fact that restaurants could not see patrons inside, we worked, with all of our entities and sister agencies and within the fire department, our code council, to come up with some guidelines that we were not 100% comfortable with, but we knew that it was temporary, and we knew that for the viable to keep the city and the restaurant owners alive during that, like I said, unprecedented time. We cooperated, and what happened, the results of it from our standpoint were not good with the compliance of our the regulations we set forth.
Were there
as a matter of fact, we only had, 38 restaurants that were approved within New York City that could actually follow the guidelines that we set forth.
Okay. And so were there any serious deaths or injuries that have occurred at a restaurant because of the use of propane?
No, luckily during this short period, we did not have any serious death or injuries, but the potential is there, and that is really what fire safety is all about. It is about the potential of taking in all the facts and the dangers and weighing the risk, and that is how we come up with fire safety procedures, not necessarily in reaction to.
Yeah, no, I said, is it fair to say you had concerns and potentially didn't support the program when it was initially implemented, but because of the state of the restaurant industry at that point, the agency was willing to create some guidelines and guidance for that, even though you weren't comfortable with that?
Well, I don't think anybody who's aware of the dangers of propane would be 100% comfortable, but we did our best to, help out, and we came up with guidelines, which, if they were followed, may have created a safer environment, but they were not followed, and that was our experience, and that's what's so troubling.
Got it. And is there a program that you could set up or support where you would approve restaurants with the safety plan to use them if they had safety measures in place and did inspections and did a number of guidelines? You had 38 restaurants, you said complied. What would stop you from creating a program to allow some restaurants to do that with inspections and safety protocols?
Well, the 38, we had 1,000 applications and 38 were approved. And I don't think it's any unwillingness for the restaurant owners to comply in some cases. It's just to keep the area safe requires certain things to be done that just the geographical situation where the restaurant is and the size of the sidewalk and proximity to other buildings, they were not able to comply. They didn't have the space, or they didn't have the configuration just did not support a legal application.
Got it. And you mentioned some uses that are still allowed, for food trucks being one. Those are restaurants on wheels. Many of them operate in my district adjacent to restaurants and next to sidewalks and in very high volume places. Can you explain the difference to me between what a food truck and a restaurant when it comes to why they'd be used? And my second follow-up question to that is, when you look at street vendors, R3 homes, which are basically single family, double family homes, the truck that was delivering them in Queens could have easily been bringing propane to any of those businesses as well. Isn't that fair to say?
Yes, but the point of that is that there'll be many more trucks on the road doing that than there would be during the time when it's just being used the way it is now. So if we had restaurants, it would exponentially increase the amount of transportation that's going on in the city, which would naturally increase the risk.
Okay. I mean, my last question, then I just have one last statement. Mayor Adams last year co-signed a letter with me in support of this and extending it in the winter months. The administration seems to be testifying counter to that today, saying that you guys are opposed to it. So just wanted to get a clarity on the sort of change in position here. Can you give us some context for, or is the FDNY and the mayor's office have a difference of opinion?
No, I think that, we were on the same page. I mean, my job is to worry about fire safety and safety of the public. And that is what, this presentation and testimony is all about. So, I can't really speak, for if there was some type of a difference between then and now, but there's been more information brought forth between then and now as well.
Okay, I'll leave my questions there. I mean, I will say, I think some of the information presented today, I think, whether I understand that there's the accident that happened and there was a fire in Queens, and we are here to protect fire safety. But I do think I was looking for maybe some guidance on a program or a plan that maybe would work for restaurants that really maybe wanted or needed guidelines we could have, versus showing us videos of a fire that happened not at a restaurant, or recognizing that the outdoor dining program that was set up very hastily, and even the sheds themselves, a lot of them have issues, and we're looking for a permanent program. So I would have hoped to maybe have some guidance here on a way we could have worked together on this. And instead we got a presentation about how dangerous this is, with some examples that I think were not at restaurants. But I'll leave it there. I know other colleagues have questions, and I do hope the mayor's office will clarify their position to me, and then also perhaps come forward with some ideas about how maybe this could work. Thanks.
So before we go to Councilmember Holden, I have to echo what Councilmember Powers is saying. And Chief Hodgins, I understand your position, but this hearing and what we believe the purpose was to constructively cite examples where we can have safe storage and a framework can be built for regulations on safe storage and use. So, you know,
Yeah, I
we
understand
have
that.
38 restaurants that receive permits. You know, what were the guideline requirements for the restaurants who struggled with meeting the compliance? And how do those guidelines compare to the requirements in the International Fire Code?
Well, like I expressed before, the configuration of the, you know, how many buildings there are, the size of the sidewalk, all of those factors, you know, come into play when it comes to having an approved, you know, site where this could be done safely. And just the nature of the city and the density, and it did not really allow for it in most cases. And so that's why it's a dangerous situation, or more dangerous than even, you know, there's always a risk when you use propane, but having, you know, a street where there's maybe 10 to 12 restaurants doing this just increases the risk, you know, to a level that is probably very difficult to be acceptable.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want to have another question, or should we pass it to Councilmember Holden?
We can pass to Councilmember Holden for now.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Holden, you may begin.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for the testimony. By the way, I don't see, I mean, 90% of the businesses in New York City, the restaurants, being able to legally store these outdoors because of the close, like you said, the close proximity. And you knew, everyone knew that if you have these propane tanks and you can store them indoors, that they would store them in those sheds, those outdoor sheds, which I can see, like you said, Chief, a catastrophe happening if a vehicle struck it. So I think the risks outweigh the benefits definitely on this. It's to me, it's a no-brainer. It only takes one. I mean, if we had one of these, let's say a truck did slam into an outdoor shed with 15 of these propane tanks, a lot of people could die. A lot of buildings would be taken out. If you had one of those things happening in years, that the risk would certainly outweigh the benefits. So I don't believe in taking a risk like this for a benefit. Now, Chief, can you recommend a better heating system? Like my colleague Keith Power said, you know, if not the propane, what else would you recommend as an alternative, but a safe alternative?
So there are two safe alternatives, and they are legal today without any more approvals necessary, and that is electric. Would be, you know, done by a licensed electrician and providing electric to any type of outdoor area, and also piped natural gas, which is what we use in our stoves and to heat, you know, in boilers for heating, can be also, you know, through a licensed process with approvals safely installed to provide heat in an outdoor structure.
Right, and just seeing, you know, by the way, my district's very close to that accident on the Long Island Expressway, and that was frightening. And this is what could happen. This should be a fair warning to everyone who wants to promote this, the propane tanks. I would even go as far as to say, even homeowners should be aware that you can't store this in the garage. And I bet a lot of people do store propane tanks, extra tanks in their garages that could be attached to their residence or just inside. So I think we need to educate the public. I don't think this is a viable alternative. Like you mentioned, let's go with either the electric or the natural gas. I don't think we should take the risk. I think New York City is the wrong place by far to do this. I think we should know better. Chair, I just don't see why this is even being heard, to tell you the truth, given the risk. I respect the fire department and their opinions. They know best. We have to listen. And again, we can't just have these. I mean, look how those tanks were stored out in the structures and in the basements. I mean, you have hundreds of these things, and they could take out the block. And again, this is just the risks far outweigh the benefits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, council member. Just a follow up for Chief Hodgins. So outdoor storage of propane, it's currently for sale, right? We see it at gas stations, the Home Depot. You know, how is that permitted?
Well, they have, the storage facility that they're operating out of is inspected and regulated, and it's approved. It goes through a whole approval process. It's not, it's not just, an open space. It has all of the safety components that are necessary to safely store the gases.
Okay, thank you. Josh?
Yes, Councilmember Yeager, you may go ahead.
Starting time.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chiefs. I just want to start very briefly with following up a little bit on Councilman Holden's questions regarding the safe storage. The draft bill that we're hearing today has a prohibition for storing inside buildings. And given the real fact that if a restaurant can't store these tanks inside the building, and we don't want them storing it outside against the building, and we also don't want them storing them inside these wooden sheds, these shantytown shacks, as I've described them here in the council. Chief, do you see any way that a restaurant can actually store these safely?
On site, I do not see any safe way of storing these, and that's one of the biggest issues. Storage is probably the biggest problem with this whole bill. So, what outdoor dining with propane use. We support outdoor dining, but just the propane that we're not supporting.
Well, Chief, I support anybody eating wherever they feel like it, as long as they're not building a wood shack in the middle of the street and setting fire to it through their own carelessness. But let me ask you a different question, Chief. Do you know how many of these shantytown structures were struck by vehicles over the last 2 years? A rough guesstimate.
I don't have a number, but I know that it happened, quite a few times where we had, accidents.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. Given that the number of authorized vendors, street vendors, is a known quantity. In other words, somebody can't just decide tomorrow to take a wagon, put a propane tank on it, stand on a street corner and pitch hot dogs. You have to have a license, and the city knows how many there are. Do you have a rough estimate or some sort of knowledge of how many propane tanks are currently in use on the streets of New York by street vendors right now?
I don't have any particular data on that. I'm not sure if Chief Jordan or Kelly Carr has any information about that, but we can always get that for you and provide that to you.
Okay. I mean, my without knowing the actual number, my rough guess is there's only relatively a few. I mean, there's not, whereas you see restaurants on every single block in some neighborhoods that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 of these street shacks. You don't have that with the corner vendors pitching hot dogs. That's, you see it on one corner, then you see it 6 corners later, 12 corners after that. There's probably a few hundred in the city, I would say. But I'm sure that the number is known to some agency because they are licensed. The draft bill that the council's considering today, I'm sorry, let me get it back up with my other screen, does not provide for, from my reading of it, does not provide for the maximum number of canisters that may be stored. You testified, Chief, that an R3 residents may purchase one for usage and then store a second one as a backup, and they can't have 3 though, right?
Right. They
Okay.
could have one additional.
Okay, so then the restaurant that wants to heat its outdoor shack, is there a way they can just do that with having 2, and that's it? and no backup if they were going to stay in business for more than a day?
No, they could not, they would need more than that if they were
Well, they
going
would
to
have
be
to-
open.
So they would have to get a delivery in essence every single day. Like the milkman comes in the morning and brings the milk to the restaurant. They would have to get a delivery of propane tanks every single day in order to operate the street shack.
Yes.
So let me ask you this, because my time is running out. Chief, I noticed you're 4 stars on your collar. How many years are you with the department?
36.
Chief Jordan, noticed you're 3. How many years are you with the department?
36 as well.
It's a nice 72 years and 2 people. So let me ask you this question. Is there any safe way that we can increase the number of propane tanks flowing around through the city of New York on our streets, on our roads, on our highways? Chief Hodgins.
The more cylinders that you introduce into an area, it increases the risk. It's just, you know, propane is inherently dangerous substance, and you know, the more that you have, just like anything else, it's going to exponentially increase the risk, and that is our main concern. You know, is the volume and that would be necessary, and the constant transportation of propane. I don't see for New York City and how densely populated and the configuration of our buildings and restaurants into small areas, how that can be done, you know, safely with propane.
Well, Chief, my time expired, but like you and like Chief Jordan, I'm also in the risk-averse business when it comes to creating hazardous conditions on the streets of New York. So thank you very much for your testimony today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Yeager. We've also been joined by Councilmember De La Rosa and Councilmember Gennaro. Just a couple of follow-up questions. During the period in which the use of propane-fueled heaters was authorized, did the fire department respond to any reported occurrences of faulty propane-fueled heating devices? Were there any leaks that were reported to the FDNY? And if so, how many violations were issued for the unlawful use, storage, or transportation of propane-fueled heating devices? And what types of violations were they?
So we had, you know, numerous violations, as I stated. We had over 1,000 violation orders issued for illegal, you know, use of propane. As far as response, fire response, emergency response to incidents, I would have to, you know, comb through the data. It would be classified as a gas, and I would have to see if I could comb out which ones were propane related. I don't have that available right now, but there were, you know, numerous enforcement calls due to illegally storing and using the heaters that we dealt with on a large scale.
And what are the costs of the violations when they're given?
Most of the violations can be cured on the spot, and we did allow that. That's what a violation order is. There is no cost if they can clear up the condition with, you know, within you know, we call it forthwith. Like if you can remove these cylinders, have a vendor come, a licensed vendor come and pick up these cylinders, then we'll you know, there will be no like fine or summons or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how many restaurants applied for the electric or piped natural gas heaters? For that?
No, I do not have that information.
You don't. And if I could further ask, has the city put in a mechanism to fund restaurants were they offered city funding to replace the propane heaters with natural gas or with electric?
There is a program from the city. It's outside of the fire department's purview. I'm not well versed in it, but I believe there was something put in place for that.
Do you know who, if any, received that funding?
No, I'm not aware.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. If any other council members have any questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function. Seeing none. Chair Ariola, you could close this up and then we could hand on to public testimony.
I want to thank everybody for your testimony. I think it was honest. I think it was enlightening. And I think it really gives us what we need to do to make a framework so that this particular program can work. Because we do want to see our restaurants succeed. And we want to see those who are eligible be able to have outdoor dining and do that and have our patrons be comfortable while they're eating. But we also do not want to have a risk for their lives. And as council members Holden and Yeager have mentioned, if the risk always has to be taken into consideration when putting any type of legislation forward. But I think the purpose of this hearing and council member Powers, his legislation is to find the safe way to do this. So I'm looking forward to public testimony. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Chair. We'll now move on to the public testimony section of this hearing. We will begin with Max Bookman, followed by Kathleen Riley, followed by Valerie De La Rosa. We're going to do, unlike normal council hearings, we're going to call on each of you individually. So just be prepared when the sergeant says time to begin. So we can begin with Mr. Bookman.
Starting time.
Starting
time.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Max Bookman. I'm an attorney and partner with the law firm Pazetsky and Bookman. Our firm is general and legislative counsel to the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which the members know is our industry trade association here in the city. I want to thank Chair Ariola for holding this hearing, and I want to thank Councilmember Powers for your leadership in sponsoring this bill, as well as Councilmember Velasquez for signing on to it. I too would like to echo some of the comments made by Chair Ariola and Councilmember Powers that we were hoping to hear from the fire department at this meeting, a constructive framework by which we could have a program in place that supports our still ailing New York City restaurants, allows people to eat outdoors in all times of the year, which is something that's accomplished all throughout the country and the state, while of course maintaining public safety, which is paramount. Anyone who's traveled outside of the city of New York, elsewhere in the state and elsewhere in the country, has all eaten somewhere where you've sat under propane heaters. And so there has to be a way that it could be done safely, and it's done in densely populated areas as well. And this was something that the then Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, who's now our mayor, supported at one period of time. So it's not exactly what we heard today. We hope that there can be a compromise that's reached, because the existing requirements for piped in natural gas are unsustainable for restaurants. So it was too expensive. No one did it before the pandemic, and that was back when restaurants had money. Now the restaurants are still ailing from the economic effects of COVID-19. No one has money to do it through natural gas. And so there really needs to be a way to do this safely and effectively. And we hope that the administration can continue to work with the council to come up with a way to get it done safely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Kathleen Riley, followed by Valerie De La Rosa, followed by James Malios. So Kathleen Riley, you may begin.
Starting time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kathleen Riley. I'm with the New York State Restaurant Association. And I have to agree with a lot of what Max spoke to say just now. As you all know, the restaurant industry is continuing to struggle in the city. Our operators are in debt, they owe back rent, they're experiencing lower sales, and it will take a long time for them to dig out of that situation. Propane is the most energy and cost efficient way for people to heat their outdoor spaces based on the feedback that we've gotten from our members who have tried it all. It's less burdensome to install than the natural gas. It has a stronger heat put than the electric, and it doesn't put an electrical strain on the older buildings that might not be able to have the capacity to add all of those extra electrical setups for the outdoor areas. Many of our restaurant operators also already invested in propane when it was allowed. And at the time, it's not that they thought it would be permanent, but I think they at least thought as long as we were dealing with the pandemic as a city, and as long as we had open restaurants going, that propane heaters could be part of that solution. And of course, I know that's not the way it ended up happening. The pandemic has been unpredictable, and we don't know when another wave is coming. In the context of pandemic response, keeping outdoor dining viable in an extended season makes sense. That means, the springs where today my weather said it feels like 11 degrees outside and it's March, but it's bright and sunny. For the spring season, the colder fall season and nights, being able to seat outside even when it's a little on the chillier side does make sense. And also, think back to this past winter, we thought we were in the clear, and then the Omicron wave basically shut down dining inside during the holiday season. It's also worth noting that people's tastes have changed during the pandemic, and many people are at this point preferring and seeking out outdoor dining options. We expect that to continue. While there were no safety incidents from the propane heaters, we agree that safety is important, and we encourage the fire department to create a comprehensive training video module, what have you, that we are glad to disseminate. We would also suggest that if FDNY is able to vet and approve and suggest carters that they feel are especially safety conscious, because obviously any sort of crash on the highway is tragic. If there are ones that the FDNY feels are especially, upstanding and they're able to refer to restaurants, that's also something that we would be happy to disseminate members. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Councilmember Holden, you have a question? You may go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to ask the panelists that just spoke if they have a suggestion on the storage, or they can point us to their clients that have stored it properly outdoors, a number of them, let's say these propane tanks. Because what we heard is of the nightmare stories. Do we have any examples of proper storage from your clients that you could show us, especially if they're storing 20, 30 of these propane tanks, which must be stored outdoors? Do we have some good, we saw the nightmare scenarios from the fire department. Do we have any great examples of somebody that's storing it properly? Can you show us?
I think the majority of people were using some sort of service, or in a scenario where they were, like, let's say they have a personal home that's somewhere that's significantly more sparse, like they live out on Long Island somewhere. I think some people were bringing them back to like a big yard and storing them away from people's homes. But I think the majority of people were using service providers to pick up their tanks and bring them to a safe, permitted storage facility at the end of the night.
But if you could send the committee photographs of proper storage, we could look at that as an example. But I just don't see how it's possible, given the chief saying you would have to get daily service deliveries, because if you're storing 20 or 30 of these outdoors in a tight space, that seems to be a recipe for disaster at this point. I just don't I don't see how. Again, point us to some great examples in a tight space that these are stored properly, because according to the chief, it can't be done.
Well, I think the chief did say that storage providers are permitted by the fire department. So I don't have pictures of what they look like on the inside, because that's like 3 degrees away from where I am.
That's what I'm asking for, photographs of the storage that the committee can look at and say, all right, this might be the model. But if you can send us, rather than saying, you did hear the testimony from the chief. You did see that it's dangerous. You did see the nightmare scenarios that probably a lot of restaurants were storing these indoors because they can't store them outdoors, the amount that they need. So, and if you're saying electric is not even an option, first of all, like I don't even know why we would even try to jeopardize anyone with these storage, with these propanes, because the restaurants are open now. We're back to I think normal almost. But thank you, Chair.
Should I reply, or if time has expired?
It's up to the chair.
I think that we'll look to the fire department to give us examples of the restaurants that worked. I know that we did, and that's why I asked the question, were these just the really bad actors? Where were some of the scenarios where they were stored properly and the chief did not have that information? So we'll circle back with the chief for those videos, those pictures, and those statistics so he can provide it to us, because those are very important.
Thank you so much, Chair. Councilmember Yeager has a question.
Starting time.
Thank you. I just want to point out, Chair, and to the panel that at the end of the day, if a restaurant is going to be open and successful, it's going to have access to more than the two that the fire code currently allows, the fire department currently allows. And no matter what the storage ultimately is, and clearly we don't want people storing them indoors, we don't want people storing them in the shacks, we don't want people storing them outdoors against their facades. We don't want people storing them in a place where they can be stolen or accessed for nefarious purposes. Then we're ultimately creating a situation, there's no way around it, where there's going to be delivery of these. It just has to take place. So that would require these to be trucked around the city, all over the city, at a time where we keep talking about reducing truck traffic, reducing vehicular traffic into Manhattan and into the business districts. And it just doesn't seem to be that propane is the way to go. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no way for these to be heated. But, some of the testimony that we heard was that, well, if COVID comes back, we're going to have these outdoor structures. I must simply state the obvious. I think that if COVID comes back to the point where restaurants have to be closed and people therefore have to eat outdoors, putting them in an enclosed structure is not outdoors. That's not outdoors. That's still indoors. And, sealing up a wood shack just because it happens to be on the street doesn't make for outdoor dining. That's just sitting indoors in a new shack outside. So I think, using that as a reason for why we must get this done, I don't think makes sense. I think if we say using it as the reason that we have to do it is because we want restaurants to be able to double the size, okay, then let's just say that. But please, let's not use this must be outdoor dining, it must take place. It's not outdoor dining, because if it was outdoors, it wouldn't need to be heated. People want to sit outdoors, they don't need to be heated. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Cool. Moving on to the next panelist. We will hear from Valerie Della Rosa, followed by James Malios, followed by Robert Eli.
Great.
Starting time.
Good morning, Chair Ariola and members of the committee. I am Valerie Della Rosa, Chair of Manhattan Community Board 2's Reopening Working Group. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this legislation. Manhattan Community Board 2 speaks with authority on this matter before you because our community district has over 10% of all open restaurants across all 5 boroughs and 20% of all open restaurants in Manhattan. We have seen a 500% increase in the number of eating and drinking establishments and outdoor dining, putting our number to over 1,000. This proposed legislation before you has 3 glaring blind spots that compromise public safety and integrity of outdoor dining. You've already heard from Chief Hodgins, who's given you the overall public safety message, so I'm going to go into very specifics that are concerning. Every single one of the 3 points I'm about to make were identified as minimum public safety standards by FDNY at a December 2020 CB2 Reopening Working Group meeting, December 2020. At a minimum, portable heating device fueled by liquefied petroleum gas should be a minimum of 10 feet from any building entrance window or ventilation. However, the legislation as proposed only calls for a 5-foot clearance from buildings and exits. There is no mention of clearances for windows or ventilation. Second, at a minimum, chairs and tables made of combustible material should have a 5-foot clearance between the portable heating device that's filled with liquefied petroleum gas and any sort of chairs or tables made of combustible materials. However, the proposed legislation only calls out combustible decorations, overhangs, awnings, sun control devices, and that is a huge, huge oversight. 3, at a minimum, there should be a 5-foot clearance between 2 propane heaters. However, the language in the legislation has there's no language addressing that. All 3 of these safety minimums were outlined in December of 2020, nearly 14 months ago. The fact that the legislation today Task to mitigate that is a loss, and Manhattan Community Board 2 strongly urges you not to move
Time
forward with
expired.
this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your testimony. As a reminder, everyone to submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you, everyone. Moving on next, we will hear from James Malios, followed by Robert Eli, followed by Pauline Augustine.
Starting time.
Hi, thank you for letting me testify. My name is James Malios. I own restaurants in New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, and Queens. And the last 2 restaurants we opened were outside the city, even though I grew up in New York City. It's not because I like driving, but after hearing this testimony today, it sort of makes me feel like the next one's going to be in Nassau or Suffolk again, if God willing that happens. Because Councilman Holman, we are not back to normal. I'm sitting on $1 million worth of debt that I took on to keep our restaurants open. Now, with regards to propane, let's not focus on, like, frankly, respectfully, incendiary, prejudicial videos. But I'm not going to show videos of people firing guns at propane tanks and nothing happening, which you can easily access on Mythbusters. I'll tell you how we stored propane, because you asked, Councilman Holden. We stored propane at first, when the first time we got inspected, what I was told actually was to store it in a car, which I find just to be absolutely gobsmackingly weird, that you'd put it in a car on the street or a car in a garage, much less with hundreds of other cars, which didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But instead, what we did was we paid a service, probably around $200 a day, to bring in propane tanks every day and take them out every night, because that was vital to our survival as a business. And we employ 50 New Yorkers. So I think what we like to know is, if it's, look, I get it. Safety is important. I don't want to minimize it, but at the end of the day, we all know it's not the only concern, right? Alcohol killed more people than COVID last year, but I don't see us going back to prohibition anytime soon. So the question is, what is, not whether illegally storage tank facilities, but the question is there a way that New York City, like Chicago, like Paris, I'm talking about rinky-dink cities that are like 500,000 people, can figure out a way to deliver and pick up propane, just like I do in Suffolk, just like I do in Nassau, and just like they do in major metropolitan areas across this world, because that's what we need to not to get ourselves out of the debt that we've taken. Looks like we're, quote, normal.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Moving on, we'll hear from Robert Eli, followed by Pauline Augustine, followed by Leslie Clark.
Starting time.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. My name is Robert Ely. I'm a resident in the west side of Greenwich Village. And I would like to point out to everybody that the restaurant around the corner from me has a backyard, and where they store, and now they use and they stored between 15 and 18 of these propane tanks. The backyard is completely surrounded by residential apartments, including the bedroom windows of our apartment, maybe 35, 40 feet away. And so the storage on the exterior sounds great, but when it's in a backyard surrounded by buildings that are all residential, it's about as dangerous as it can come. And so I heard the concern about, the dangers involving those who attend restaurants or go to restaurants. But I'm here to say there are residents that live right near the restaurant that will be tremendously affected from the safety or the concerns of safety with regards to propane tanks. I also hear about all these other cities and all these other areas, suburbs or wherever, where these propane tanks are being used. Well, guess what? They're not Greenwich Village, they're not New York City. Our particular area, along with many other particular areas of New York City, just were never properly zoned the way other cities and the way other communities operate. And what I mean by that is that we have residents living over business. We have mixed use areas. You call them commercial. They're not commercial, they're residential. And that's where, when everybody's compacted, everybody's put together, when there is just one incident, people are going to die. So we talk about risk, we talk about safety, but it's just crazy to even think that we can do that in downtown Manhattan or in other areas like that. And
time expired.
I have a picture, which I will send in, that shows the 16 tanks being delivered to the backyard. So I please think about that when we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, sir. Next, we'll hear from Pauline Augustine, followed by Leslie Clark, followed by Derek Kay.
Starting time.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I live on a tiny street with 25 feet street beds, 11 restaurants, unbelievably crowded people day and night, residential buildings, 11 restaurants, and 425 street length. There have been so many misuses of propane in my tiny area when they were allowed. I'm surrounded by danger. It's just as simple as that. We're talking about people who, and employees and owners, who are not really trained to handle everything that can go wrong. We're talking about people who will be asked to handle them, who actually, let's face it, have communication problems because they don't even speak English. And they're going to be in really more danger. We know we're human beings. We make mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. And this is lethal. Talking about eating out with propane anywhere in the world, no, not in Paris, not allowed. I used to live there. I've been back and forth. Never saw a propane heater, not allowed. Why? They know the dangers. So anyway, why are we even talking about this program, heat in the cold weather, when the program that's going forward supposedly doesn't include the winter months? So I really don't even know what we're doing here. But everybody who's presented the dangers and the experience of the fire department, if we can't listen to them, and you can't protect me, my family, or anybody around me, it's very, very concerning. I really thank you for letting me allow to testify, and please vote against this. It just does not make any sense whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Leslie Clark, followed by Derek Kay, followed by Stuart Waldman.
Starting time.
Yes, thank you, council members, for listening to my testimony today. And I also would like to particularly thank City Council Member Holden for defining this as a question of the benefit versus the danger. And when you have a danger as great as was described to us this morning by the fire department personnel, I don't see what benefit can possibly outweigh that. It doesn't, it just takes one. I also live, it just takes one explosive incident. And by the way, I used to live in a country that used this, the Dominican Republic, and there were explosions all the time from this very dangerous, heavier than air gas. What I find particularly troublesome here is talking about ways that people in restaurants are going to follow a set of guidelines. And I'm also hearing today something I hear a lot, which is there are a few bad actors, everybody else is doing it right. Well, we had a survey done of our neighborhood in the summer of 2021 by City Council President Corey Johnson's office that showed that 93% of restaurants in our City Council district did not follow the rules of outdoor dining. Now, that's one thing if you're putting chairs on the curbside, but if which is annoying, but you're talking about only 7% of restaurants following the rules in our City Council district. This is a serious problem. I would just like to get rid of this notion that there are a few bad actors. In fact, there are very few who have actually followed the rules in a program that is notorious for non-enforcement by the DOT. I think all of you can look to your own districts and see it around you all the time. The DOT does not enforce this program. I strongly urge you to go with the danger here and vote against this dangerous bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Derek Kay, followed by Stuart Waldman, followed by Leif Artson. Derek, you may begin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Derek Kay. I'm the owner of Takumi Taco, which has several food businesses in New York City. I own several food trucks, and I'm also the owner of NYC Propane Delivery. Last year, I also, during the pandemic, had one of those 38 permits that legally allowed my food business to have a propane heater on site. I founded NYC Propane Delivery when my food businesses were closed during the pandemic. NYC Propane Delivery offers a drop-off and pickup service for restaurants. So we drop off the propane tanks in the morning, and then we pick them up at the end of the night. So this is a safe solution for storage for restaurants, so they do not have to store any propane tanks on site. Contrary to popular belief, propane tanks are a safe and efficient resource to restaurants with outdoor heaters. They're used throughout the country and much of the world, and they're used in cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, all with very limited rules and regulations. Not that I'm saying that there shouldn't be. I believe that the city and the fire department can come to an amicable agreement on the conditions that would alleviate their concerns. Of course, the top one being that no propane is ever stored on site, that it is always dropped off and picked up by companies like my own, and that companies like myself work with larger regional suppliers such as Paraco Gas or Blue Rhino to ensure that the tanks are always inspected every single time they are refilled, and they're refilled to the maximum limit and not overfilled any more than that. There are thousands of propane tanks on the streets already being delivered daily. There are a few thousand food trucks and food carts in New York City, which means there are 6,000 or 7,000 tanks already out on the streets. To the best of my knowledge, there are also, there's talk of lifting the cap of permits for food trucks and carts, meaning that another, I believe, 1,000 permits will be given out for more food trucks and carts who will also have more propane tanks to be on the streets as well. So I just want to reiterate that there are safe ways for drop off and pickup to be done, and that if 1,000 restaurants each used 4 propane tanks, that would be 4,000 tanks, which would require about 12 propane delivery trucks to carry. So I know that we're talking about, you know, large numbers and macro ideas, but with 10 or 15 trucks in New York City, you can service close to 1,000 restaurants on a daily basis, working with a propane supplier outside of New York City like Paraco Gas. I'm happy to answer questions and would love to be able to work with the City Council and the fire department on this as both a restaurateur who used propane and somebody that owns a propane delivery company.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Moving on, we'll hear from Stuart Waldman, followed by Leif Arntzen, followed by Diem Boyd.
Starting time.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I actually put away my testimony because the chief said it a lot better than I could say it. To those council members who are trying to figure out a way to make this unsafe and dangerous proposal legal, I'd like to remind you that we're 3 days removed from the anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Now, Triangle Factory opened in 1901. 10 years, it operated safely for 10 years. There were no problems. But in 1911, 146 people died in a fire. So fire prevention isn't about, oh, well, we tried this and it was a little dangerous, but look, it's worked. It's about judging. It's about judgment. And the fire chief has better judgment than you and me. We live in a densely populated city. Any small accident could take hundreds of lives. And I'd like you to consider that when you're voting on this, because this is human life we're talking about. We're not talking about dollars and cents. We're talking about human life, and that always should come first. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Waldman. My name is Alex Polinoff, and I'll be filling in as moderator for the remainder of the hearing. Next up, we will hear from Leif Arntzen, followed by Diem Boyd, and then Alida Camp. Mr. Arntzen, you may begin when the sergeants announce the time.
Starting time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Central Village Block Association, as well as for Catherine Arntzen. We're together here, but speaking for our neighborhood. I would just say it's We can't get our streets swept. We can't get Access-A-Ride into the street to pick up elderly. Yet now we're contemplating to Mr. Kay's idea and new startup business to start making room for more trucks to try to enter a street that's already congested to do what? To deliver propane tanks and pickup tanks. I find it, I'm certainly not interested in your service for that. I just want to say that residents in this neighborhood are adamantly opposed to restaurants being allowed to use propane outdoors. In this area, there's 115 active liquor licenses within a 750-foot radius of Cornelia Street. There are 11 operations on this one single narrow block. This is a residential zone with mixed-use space and with ground levels used throughout the area. There's cellar hatches, grates, below-ground stairwells, Con Ed hatches and grates and manholes directly outside the restaurants, and they're directly outside our doors and windows of our homes. This is where residents live. And restaurants and bars are notoriously challenged to control conditions inside their spaces, let alone outside on the sidewalks and streets that are outside our homes. Entrusting safe handling of this dangerous gas to the hands of restaurant owners and workers is totally unacceptable, and we urge this council to respect our safety concerns. We, as Stu said, the fire department spoke volumes.
Time expired.
And we're very concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnson. Next up, we will hear from DM Boyd, followed by Alita Camp, and then Sherry Leon. DM Boyd, you may begin when the sergeants announce the time.
Starting time.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you, council members, for holding this hearing. But most of all, thank you for the FDNY chief for explaining the dangers of the situation. No one else can explain it better, and no one else should not be heard more than the fire department. I'm going to send you examples. I live on the Lower East Side. We have hundreds and hundreds of shantytown sheds surrounding our homes. They're just waiting to catch on fire. We have photographs of propane gas kept outside, and then we have photographs of following days where they were vandalized. This is just an unwise program, and for the council members, they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole to justify a program that will put lives at risk is absolutely insane to me. Just so you know, Paris has banned these heaters, these gas propane heaters. And one of the other reasons that no one's discussing is because of the environmental impact these propane gas heaters cause from CO2 emissions. That's another factor. And the fact that we're going to ask restaurants now to have delivery trucks to bring propane gas as a resolution is insane. The traffic is insurmountable, and a lot of it is caused by these sheds that are causing backup. And again, I just want to end on a note about the fire department. They've done so much through this program, this emergency program. I've had to see fire trucks back up into streets because of the sheds. I've seen them like barely fit in, and I just want to just really give applause and a shout out to the fire department for working extra hard, and we should not be putting their lives at risk because of propane gas for the restaurant industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd. Next, we will hear from Alita Camp, followed by Sherry Leon. And as a reminder, if anybody would like to testify who has not already done so, please use the Zoom raise hand function or email your testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Alita Camp, you may begin when the sergeants announce the time.
Starting time.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Alita Camp. I'm a member of Community Board 8 Manhattan, but I'm testifying individually. The fire department powerfully demonstrated the dangers of using, storing, and moving propane heaters and tanks. The department are experts in fire safety and prevention. Enforcement of many outdoor dining rules failed. Who will enforce the propane heater rules? That there were no deaths when they were used does not mean that there will not be any in the future. The dangers are clear. New York is densely populated. Restaurants now have indoor dining. There is simply no reason to allow propane tanks. Would you eat at a restaurant with a D or F health rating? Would you go to the airport in a cab without seatbelts? Would you get in a for-hire vehicle if the driver didn't match the information you were texted? Would you do any of these if you could save a few dollars? Why would you allow heaters that are a fire safety hazard when there are alternatives? Why would you allow public health and safety to be at risk when there are alternatives? New York is congested. Fires have resulted in deaths. Why would you take the chance? I don't want to live near or above propane tank usage or storage for restaurants. I don't even want to walk down the street next to restaurants with propane heaters and tanks. Do you? Do your constituents? Is the risk worth the savings when there are alternatives? What if a pedestrian walks by with a flammable coat? What if someone gets caught on a sidewalk and trips against the propane heater? Listen to the expert, the fire department. There is simply no reason to put the lives of New Yorkers at risk when there are alternatives. As Councilmember Holden stated, it only takes one. Cars have hit restaurant sheds. And the danger from that makes it even worse. You must look out for all New Yorkers. There is no safe way for restaurants to use and store propane heaters safely in the city. If there is a tragedy, do you want it on your heads? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Camp. And we will hear from the next panelist is Sherry Leon. And one more time, as a reminder, please email your written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Sherry Leon, you may begin when the sergeants announce the time.
Starting time.
Hi, thank you, council members, for holding this hearing, and thank you for allowing public testimony at it. I have many prepared remarks that really have already been delivered to you by other members of the community and residents in the community. So I'm just going to say one thing, which is that as of today, actually, I'm going to say more than one thing, but the first thing I'm going to say is as of today, there are 12,241 open restaurant sites that are registered to participate in the program. And if you took a very, very minimum estimate of the number of propane heaters that those sites would require in the winter months, I'm using the number of 5 per restaurant site. That's low. It's a conservative measure. That would result in about 60,000, over 60,000 propane heaters and tanks being deployed out on the streets and sidewalks of New York in very densely populated areas. I would just urge you to take the scale of that deployment into account when you're considering this. I understand that, for example, Derek Kay said that, he thinks there's a few thousand out there right now with food vendor trucks. That means that were this to be granted, this bill to be passed, there would be 10 times as many propane heaters out and about amongst residents, tourists, restaurant owners, and the public in general. I think that's a significant increase that, as the FDNY chief has said, is really what this is all about, the context. It's about the context. So I would urge you to take the increased safety risks in that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. Seeing as there are no additional panelists signed up to testify, I will turn it back to Chair Ariola for closing remarks.
I'd like to thank the council staff. I'd like to thank the council members who spoke, our chiefs from the fire department, and especially the people who came to give public testimony. It certainly was compelling, and it brings us to a point where it's now our job to take those divergent perspectives and find a solution. So again, I thank all of you for coming out, and I look forward to us now internally having conversation regarding this issue and this bill. This is the end of the hearing, Alex.
Thank you, Chair Ariel. Thank you.